It is a common and perhaps understandable myth that the Federalist Papers were a clarion call for a vast and overbearing central government, a leviathan designed to swallow the independence of the states and the liberties of the individual. This narrative often paints the authors as men eager to consolidate power at the national level, trading the hard-won freedoms of the revolution for a new, homegrown form of tyranny. This perception, however, significantly misrepresents the core arguments and the very soul of these remarkable essays. We will test this myth by delving into what the papers truly articulate. We will see that, far from advocating for unchecked authority, they present a meticulous and reasoned defense of a new form of government, one carefully engineered to be both effective and crucially limited. The essays are not a celebration of raw power, but a detailed blueprint for its responsible containment. The authors, writing under the collective pseudonym Publius, were deeply cognizant of the public's profound fear of a distant, powerful government, a fear born from their recent and painful experience with the British Crown. Therefore, their primary task was not to demand blind trust in a new national authority, but to persuade a skeptical populace that the proposed United States Constitution was the greatest available safeguard for their liberty. They sought to demonstrate step by step how this new system would prevent the very abuses of power that so many Americans rightly feared, creating a government strong enough to function but constrained enough to remain the servant of the people. The Federalist Papers were a collection of 85 essays published in New York newspapers between October 1787 and August 1788, a critical period when the fate of the newly drafted Constitution hung precariously in the balance. These influential pieces were the work of three remarkable men, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, writing together under the shared Roman pen name Publius, a reference to one of the founders of the Roman Republic. They embarked on a vigorous public relations campaign. Hamilton, the driving force behind the project, was a brilliant and energetic New York delegate. Madison, a Virginian often called the father of the Constitution, brought profound intellectual depth, and Jay, a seasoned diplomat and fellow New Yorker, contributed his expertise on foreign affairs. Their purpose was direct and unambiguous, and to persuade the citizens of New York, a large and influential state with significant opposition to the Constitution, to elect delegates to their ratifying convention who would vote in favor of the new framework of government. The Articles of Confederation, the nation's first governing document, had proven disastrously weak. The central government lacked the power to tax, to regulate commerce effectively, to field a credible army, leading to economic chaos and internal strife. The authors of the Federalist saw the Constitution not as a threat but as a desperate and necessary remedy to the very real possibility that the young American experiment would collapse into anarchy or dissolve into rival confederacies. A deep-seated fear of a powerful central government was the single greatest obstacle they faced. Anti-Federalist writers argued passionately that the Constitution would strip the states of their autonomy and trample individual liberties. One of the most fundamental principles championed throughout the Federalist Papers is the separation of powers. The authors, particularly Madison, in essays like Federalist No. 47 and No. 51, drew heavily upon Montesquieu, who had argued that there can be no liberty if the legislative, executive, and judicial powers are united in the same person or body. Legislative, executive, judicial Publius took this theoretical concept and explained how it was practically embedded within the very architecture of the Constitution. The idea was to prevent the dangerous accumulation of all governmental authority into a single set of hands, which they saw as the very definition of tyranny. The essays carefully delineate the distinct roles of the three branches of the new national government. First is the legislative branch, Congress, composed of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Its primary function, as Publius explains, is to make the laws. This branch represents the will of the people most directly, and is given the crucial power of the purse and the sword, the authority to tax, spend, and declare war. The second is the executive branch, headed by the President. This branch is tasked with enforcing the laws, acting as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and conducting the nation's foreign policy. While the separation of powers created distinct departments of government, the authors of the Federalist knew that this alone was not enough to prevent tyranny. A parchment barrier, as Madison famously noted, would be insufficient. To solve this, they championed the Constitution's ingenious system of checks and balances. The goal in Federalist number 51: ambition must be made to counteract ambition. Congress makes laws, but the president can veto any bill. A veto forces the legislature to reconsider. Congress can override a veto with a two-thirds vote in both chambers. The president is commander-in-chief. Only Congress can declare war. Congress controls military funding. The president nominates ambassadors, cabinet officers, and federal judges. The Senate must confirm those appointments. The ultimate check on a lawless executive is impeachment. The House can charge the president with treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. The Senate conducts a trial and can remove the president. The judiciary holds judicial review. Federalist number 78. Courts can declare laws or executive acts unconstitutional and void. The judiciary is checked. Judges are appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and impeachable by Congress. This web of mutual restraint keeps power from being absolute, and each branch polices the others. Beyond the separation of powers within the national government, the Federalist Papers expound upon another crucial, uniquely American innovation for limiting power: federalism. This is the principle of dividing governmental authority between two distinct levels of sovereignty: a national government and the individual state governments. The authors argued that this compound republic, as Madison called it, provides a double security for the rights of the people. The different governments would control each other, while each is controlled internally through separation of powers. The Constitution creates a system where some powers are delegated to the national government, some are reserved to the states, and some shared concurrently. For instance, the national government gets authority over matters of common concern, regulating interstate and international commerce, coining money, declaring war, conducting diplomacy. Meanwhile, the Federalists stressed the states would retain broad influence over daily life. As Madison argues in Federalist number 45, federal powers are few and defined. State powers are numerous and indefinite. States would manage local affairs, education, local law enforcement, property laws, and commerce regulation within their own borders. This division of labor aimed to make government strong nationally and responsive locally. Strong at the national level for national problems, responsive at the state and local level for local concerns. Federalism also served as a check on national overreach. Section 6. Federalist number 10, Taming the Dangers of Faction. Perhaps the single most famous essay in the collection is Federalist number 10, written by James Madison. In this brilliant piece of political analysis, Madison confronts a classic problem that had plagued republics throughout history: the danger of factions. He defines a faction as a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority of the whole or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. In simpler terms, a faction is a special interest group, wealth, religion, political ideology, that pursues its own goals at the expense of the common good or the rights of others. Madison argues that the causes of faction are sown in the nature of man: different opinions, different amounts of property, different passions, leading them to form alliances with those who are similar. He dismisses the idea that factions can be eliminated by destroying liberty or by forcing every citizen to have the same opinions, calling such remedies worse than the disease. Since the causes of faction cannot be removed, the challenge, he concludes, is to control their effects. He was particularly concerned about a majority faction, which could use its democratic power to legally oppress a minority. This, he knew, was the great vulnerability of popular government. The ingenious solution Madison proposes is not to shrink from popular government, but to expand it. He argues that the ill effects of faction are much more easily managed in a large, extended republic than in a small, direct democracy. In a small community, a single, passionate faction can dominate. Madison turns this argument on its head. In a large and diverse republic, there will be far more interests: farmers, merchants, manufacturers, creditors, debtors, people of many religious sects and from different regions. With so many competing factions, it is less probable that a majority will share a motive to invade the rights of others. This multiplicity forces broad coalitions, moderates extremes, and safeguards both minority rights and national stability. Section 7. Representation and elections. The people's ultimate control. A central tenet of the Republican form of government is the principle of representation. In a nation as large as the United States, direct democracy was impractical and dangerous. It was susceptible to the passions of the moment and to the tyranny of the majority. The constitutional solution was a representative system. The people would delegate governing to a small number of citizens elected for fixed terms. Publius argued this system would refine and enlarge public views through a chosen body of citizens. The authors held a hopeful view that elections would tend to elevate individuals of wisdom, patriotism, a commitment to justice. Elected representatives, accountable to a broad constituency, would better discern the nation's true interests. Representatives would have space to deliberate, balancing competing interests and aiming for the common good. Regular elections ensured representatives remained faithful to constituents. If they failed, the people could vote them out of office. Congress's structure, 2 distinct chambers, was designed for this. The House of Representatives, members elected every 2 years from smaller local districts. The Senate, originally chosen by state legislatures for 6-year terms. Bicameralism ensured laws were considered from multiple perspectives. The Federalist Papers portray a government derived from and accountable to the people. Madison. Government derived from the great body of the society, not from an inconsiderable proportion or a favored class of it. The right to vote, to choose one's leaders, to remove them if they betray the public trust, is the final and most important check on government power. It keeps government a servant of the people and a guardian of their liberties, not their master. Section 8. A framework for liberty, the rule of law, and amendment. Beyond the grand structures of separation of powers, federalism, the Federalist Papers also emphasize the profound importance of the rule of law. This is the principle that the nation should be governed by established laws, not by the arbitrary whims of its rulers, and that these laws must apply equally to everyone, including the leaders themselves. Hamilton, in particular, argues for a steady and consistent administration of the law. A government bound by clear rules provides stability and predictability. It allows citizens to know their rights and their responsibilities and to conduct their lives and their businesses with confidence. The role of the independent judiciary is critical. In Federalist No. 78, Hamilton makes the case for life tenure to insulate judges from political pressure and popular tides, allowing decisions based on facts and the letter of the law, even when unpopular. The authors also understood no constitution could foresee every challenge. Article 5 provides a difficult but vital process for amendment, requiring broad consensus nationally and among the states, ensuring peaceful, orderly change while maintaining core principles. This combination of the rule of law and the capacity for amendment creates ordered liberty, a system securing freedom not through anarchy or weakness, but through strong, stable, predictable institutions bound by law. Section 9. Conclusion. A government of energy and limits. In summary, the Federalist Papers present a powerful and sophisticated defense of the United States Constitution, arguing for a government that strikes a delicate but essential balance, energetic enough to govern, yet constrained to preserve liberty. They witnessed the peril of weakness under the Articles, yet insisted on defined and limited powers, separation of powers, checks and balances, federalism, representation, regular elections, and the rule of law keep government accountable and bound. The Constitution is a carefully engineered machine designed to channel self-interest toward the public good, strong enough to guard against foreign threats and domestic chaos, but constrained enough to protect the people from the government itself. Therefore, the myth that the Federalist Papers pushed for an unchecked central government is incorrect. They argue for a government both strong and limited, energetic and accountable, not a new master, but a framework to secure a more perfect union and a lasting republic for a free people.